Welcome back to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into a really high-stakes challenge today, one that, honestly, it affects almost every scaling organization I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely.
It's this painful paradox, right? The company that is just fundamentally brilliant at starting things,
Yes.
but tragically,
Especially that.
tragically terrible at finishing them. And this tendency, this kind of corporate inability to just sustain focus, it often gets a label internally. They call it organizational ADHD.
And that is exactly what this deep dive is all about. We're going to be dissecting a strategic plan, one that was crafted for a real high-growth real estate startup that, frankly, needs a radical intervention.
Okay, so what's our source material here?
We have a 2-page executive summary and the detailed slide deck outline for a full 12-month transformation. And the mission, well, it's completely unambiguous. It's to diagnose this chronic priority switching and then implement a stable operating model they're calling disciplined agility.
And this isn't just some, theoretical exercise. The audience for this plan includes the CEO, the entire board, the founders, and key investors. The stakes are, they're immense and immediate.
They are.
If they fail to execute this roadmap, the report warns of continued dilution of scarce capital and talent. It could effectively just freeze the company.
And they have product market fit.
And a really challenging sector, Nigerian real estate. But they just can't convert that proof into repeatable, scalable, and, stable revenue streams.
It's like they're running a marathon where they sprint the first mile in a different direction every single hour. They have to stabilize the effort just to realize the value they've already created.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with the uncomfortable part, the diagnosis.
Right.
So the core problem statement here is, it's stark. The startup repeatedly kicks off these promising projects, invests heavily in the beginning.
A ton of resources, yeah.
And then they just pivot or completely abandon those initiatives before they ever deliver any measurable scaled value. It's an engine that's constantly turning over, but it never actually catches.
It creates organizational scar tissue. That's what it does.
Yeah.
The cycle is just innovation, investment, abandonment, demoralization.
Yeah.
And then you just repeat it.
And I bet the symptoms are pretty obvious.
Oh, they're not subtle.
Yeah.
If we look at what defines this organizational ADHD, the first thing is just the sheer volume, the frequent pivoting and that trail of abandoned projects.
It's like a graveyard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A quick glance at their project logs from the last 2 quarters would just show a huge number of projects marked close canceled versus ship scaled.
Yeah.
They invest, say, 70% of the effort to get 90% done, and then they just jettison it for something new.
A graveyard of nearly finished ideas. And that has to tie directly into the second symptom you see here. Really low follow-through on established goals. I can just picture it. The leadership team sets these ambitious OKRs every quarter, only to find that, halfway through the quarter, nobody's even looking at them anymore.
Because some urgent new idea has been elevated above everything else. It's the definition of organizational chaos. And that behavior, it leads right to the third symptom, which is resource dilution.
Spreading everyone too thin.
Impossibly thin. You end up with engineers splitting 20% of their time across 5 different high-priority projects. And what that means is that no single project ever gets the concentrated focus it needs to actually succeed.
So they're managing distraction, not executing a strategy.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But this is more than just bad project management, right? The diagnosis section here identifies 5 really deep-seated core drivers. And this is where you have to spend some time, because these drivers explain why they can't break the cycle.
Exactly.
Let's start with what the plan calls out as the most toxic driver of all: leadership signaling.
This is cultural cancer. It really is. The diagnosis says the culture celebrates starting over finishing. Now think about what that means in practice, day to day.
Yeah.
If a leader consistently gives more praise, more visibility, maybe more funding to the team that pitches the shiny new concept, the discovery team, then they give to the team grinding out the difficult scaling work, or the delivery team, well, the entire workforce is going to reorient their priorities.
Of course. Everyone wants to be recognized.
So the internal incentive structure, it just shifts away from that tedious, necessary execution and toward exciting new ideation.
That immediately signals that all the hard, dedicated work is disposable. If I'm a project manager, why should I fight to push a really challenging project over the finish line when the reward mechanism just encourages me to brainstorm the next big thing?
You wouldn't. It completely undermines any long-term commitment. And the second driver is closely related, but is more structural. Weak governance.
Meaning no process.
A critical lack of it. There are no formal, objective stage gate processes. Ideas go straight from a founder's napkin sketch or a passionate meeting directly into full development. There are no clear checkpoints, no objective kill criteria that you have to meet before you consume major engineering bandwidth.
So governance is just replaced by gut feeling or, enthusiasm of whoever is yelling the loudest in the room.
Right. And then you hit the practical constraints, which is driver number 3, skill gaps.
Ah,
They might have world-class expertise in real estate or technology, but they lack that operational spine. They have limited project management and operations capacity. These are the unsung heroes who enforce structure, who manage dependencies, who do the risk analysis, and make sure delivery is consistent and high quality.
visionary ideas need disciplined delivery professionals.
They just don't have enough of them.
The report also mentions their operating environment in Nigerian real estate. This seems to tie into driver number 4, market pressure.
It does. I mean, operating in a market with inherent volatility, with regulatory uncertainty, which the Nigerian sector definitely has,
Yeah.
it means external factors are constantly demanding reactive changes.
So when the market shifts,
When the market shifts, a founder who already loves new ideas panics, and they rationalize a pivot as an external necessity rather than an internal lack of focus.
Yeah.
So that pressure just constantly feeds the ADHD loop. The leadership's reactive behavior is, partly a response to a volatile environment, but it ultimately just destroys their internal ability to execute.
and finally, driver number 5, which sort of ties all the psychology together here, a fundamental lack of structure.
In the absence of structure, human preference just wins out. And that preference is almost always for excitement. The sheer novelty of a new idea will always outweigh the commitment required for the sometimes grinding work on the old one.
So if there's no formal process protecting Project A,
Then Project B, simply because it's newer and shinier, is going to win every single time.
okay, so let's just analyze this negative spiral that the idea-driven culture creates. This isn't just about wasting money. It feels like it's about a cascading failure of trust.
That is the critical insight. The team starts to anticipate the pivot. They see the writing on the wall. They stop investing that discretionary effort, that extra 10% you need for high-quality, polished completion, because they assume the project will be scrapped next month anyway.
Why optimize the code or finalize the sales materials if it's just destined for the trash heap?
Exactly. And that anticipation, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
Projects languish because the teams are conserving their energy for the next pivot. And then leadership, seeing the current project fail to gain momentum, confirms their own bias. They say, see, that idea wasn't good enough, we have to pivot.
It's a closed loop of mistrust and self-sabotage. The diagnosis is frankly catastrophic, but it's very clear. They're stuck. So now we have to shift our focus completely to the cure. How do they move toward this strategic North Star of disciplined agility?
And that North Star has to be compelling. Compelling enough to overcome the inertia of the last few years. The antidote to all this reactive, idea-driven chaos is defined as disciplined agility.
That combination of words is fascinating because on the surface, it seems like a contradiction. Agility implies speed and flexibility, while discipline implies structure and rigor.
And that's precisely the nuance the plan has to sell to the founders. They get it. They understand that founders need the ability to explore and react, especially in a volatile market. So disciplined agility doesn't mean no more pivots.
Okay, that's a key point.
It means every pivot, every single new initiative has to be governed and resourced intentionally. The idea is to move from these spontaneous, resource-draining reactions to, scheduled, budgeted, and structured explorations. It preserves the creative spark, but it channels the energy toward finishing and scaling the high-value initiatives.
So you're making pivots intentional strategic events, not emotional reactions.
That's it. It's about governing pivots, not outlawing them. And that clarification is absolutely critical for getting buy-in from a leadership team who probably sees their spontaneous creativity as their competitive edge.
So what does success actually look like? What are the specific measurable targets after this 12-month program?
Well, the target outcomes are basically a direct inversion of the symptoms we just talked about. First, you have to see a material reduction in the primary pathology, lower project abandonment rates. Second, a demonstrable improvement in OKR completion across the entire company. If the company is actually achieving its quarterly goals, the program is working.
And I see process metrics here too, which are crucial, the speed and transparency of the new governance.
Yes, they need shorter and more transparent decision cycles. This is so important. If the new processes slow them down, they will fail. The goal is decisiveness. And then finally, you have the cultural and financial outcomes. Improved employee engagement. Specifically, they're tracking a clarity of purpose score, and of course, enhanced revenue retention, which stabilizes the core business.
All right, let's look at the roadmap to get there. It's a four-phase structure for 2026, but it's built on a really critical prep phase in December 2025.
That incremental approach, it signals that they understand this is a change management program, not just a policy they can roll out in an email.
Right.
So it starts with Phase 0, the pre-start in December 2025. This is all essential infrastructure work. They have to establish the Strategic Repositioning Team, or SRT. This has to be a highly visible team, sponsored by the CEO, with 3 cross-functional leads like finance, product, operations.
This team is the engine of the change.
They are. And their first job is just gathering the baseline metrics, conducting a forensic audit of the current project pipeline, documenting what's happened recently, and quantifying that historical project abandonment rate. You need a crystal clear starting point to measure that 50% reduction later.
Once that baseline is set, we jump into Q1, January to March 2026. Reset and rapid stabilization. This quarter is all about building credibility fast.
It starts with a non-negotiable strategic reset workshop for all of senior leadership. And this isn't just another brainstorming session, it's an agreement session. They must collectively and explicitly nail down the company's North Star and identify the 3, and only 3, top priorities for the entire year.
That alone forces difficult conversations.
It forces prioritization
Mm-hmm.
and ensures resource alignment. Anything outside those 3 priorities is automatically deflected or sent to a tiny exploration budget.
And what's the practical work in Q1? Those early wins seem crucial for shifting the cultural signal immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Q1 demands running 1 or 2 high-impact focus sprints. These are short, only 30 to 60 days. They have to select existing projects that are, 80 or 90% complete and just force them to ship. And then leadership has to publicly celebrate those completions.
To show that the new currency is completion and impact.
Not just commencement and excitement.
Okay, so Q2 is about institutionalizing the framework, rolling out stage gates, naming champions. But the plan really matures in Q3, July through September, with the introduction of something called organizational ambidexterity.
This is, I would argue, the most sophisticated element of the entire plan. And it's the direct countermeasure to that root cause of scattered resources. Ambidexterity basically acknowledges that the business has 2 fundamentally different operational modes that just cannot exist in the same team or with the same rules.
Let's break that down because it's so vital for a startup that wants to scale. You have to run the existing engine, the exploitation stream, while you're also designing the next engine, the exploration stream.
Precisely. The exploitation stream is the scale track. Its mission is simple: deliver consistent, repeatable revenue, and defend the core market position. This team focuses on operational efficiency, optimization, margin improvement, and scaling validated features.
So their metrics are all about efficiency, ROI, churn reduction, uptime, exactly. They are disciplined, rigorous, and their tolerance for failure is extremely low because they are maintaining the profit engine of the company. This is how they turn that product market fit into consistent revenue.
And you contrast that with the exploration stream. This is where the founder's creative energy gets channeled.
Yes, and it's deliberately constrained. The exploration stream is the discovery track. It gets a small, separate, budgeted amount of capital and talent. Its mission is to test new concepts or adjacent markets or radical pivots, but to do it quickly. And crucially, their metrics are things like validated learning and time to kill.
So their tolerance for failure is high.
It's high, but their tolerance for ambiguity is low. If a pilot fails to meet its predefined exit criteria in 60 days, it is killed immediately, and the resources are freed up. This segregation protects the core profitable business from the high-risk, resource-sucking nature of novelty.
So if a founder gets a sudden brilliant idea in August 2026, they don't get to halt the Q3 optimization roadmap for the exploitation team. No, they submit the idea to PNACI, and if it's approved, it goes to the small, constrained exploration team for a time-boxed pilot. The machine keeps running while a small R&D lab tests the future, isolated from core ops.
And this all leads to the end game, Q4, October to December 2026, embed and optimize.
Q4 is all about making this permanent. Institutionalization. This means establishing formal lessons learned cadences, post-mortem reviews for both scaled projects and killed pilots, which feed into a central knowledge base. You're institutionalizing learning. And then they optimize the budgeting process, making sure there's a small, flexible reserve for controlled pivots baked into the annual budget.
So that reserve acknowledges that market pressure. It gives them a formal way to respond without blowing up the whole plan.
It prevents them from panicking. It's a controlled mechanism for market responsiveness.
This roadmap is incredibly detailed. It moves from immediate stabilization all the way to organizational restructuring.
Correct.
Which brings us to the actual nuts and bolts, the specific governance that enforces this discipline. Here's where it gets really interesting.
All right, this is where the rubber meets the road.
The strategic aims of disciplined agility, they rely entirely on the operational tools used to enforce these boundaries. And the central mechanism is this new gatekeeper, the Pivot New Initiative Approval Committee, or PNIAC. This committee literally holds the keys to the kingdom.
PNIAC is designed to replace those impulsive decisions with structured, objective evaluations. And its composition is so critical. 4 members: the CEO, a board representative, the COO or head of operations, and the product lead.
Why that specific mix? What's the thinking there?
The tension between those roles is what creates balanced decision-making.
Explain that tension.
Well, the CEO and the board rep, they represent the strategic vision, market awareness, the fiduciary duty. They might be more prone to approving those big, high-impact, high-risk ideas. But the COO, or head of operations, they represent execution capacity, resource constraints, operational reality. They are the voice of, do we actually have the people and the time to do this without sacrificing the core business? And then the product lead ensures it's technically feasible and fits the market. This mix forces enthusiasm to meet reality.
So PNIX function is defined by a cadence, a weekly intake, and then a monthly deep review for the series proposals. They're the final gate. But the real discipline isn't in the meeting itself, is it? It's in the required homework.
It's in that mandatory 4 criteria intake form. This form is accountability made tangible. No idea gets past that initial intake without a fully quantified submission against these 4 criteria. It forces structured thinking before you ever get in the room. It preempts the shiny object pitch that's based purely on excitement.
Okay, let's analyze those 4 criteria. We have alignment, impact, effort, and risk.
Right, so alignment forces the proposer to explicitly state how this new idea matches one of the 3 core priorities that were set back in that Q1 strategic reset. If it doesn't align, it either goes into that tiny constrained exploration budget or it's rejected on the spot.
Simple enough.
Then impact requires quantification. What's the expected ROI? What specific OKRs does this move and over what time frame? This is what prevents those low-value, high-effort projects from ever getting started.
And the last 2, effort and risk, these must be crucial for the operations team.
Oh, absolutely. Effort demands a realistic resource estimate, and not just engineering hours, but cross-functional dependencies, marketing support, operational training. This is where the COO gets their teeth into the proposal. And then risk requires you to identify specific failure modes and mitigation strategies up front.
And the form creates political cover.
That's a huge part of it. If a founder pitches an idea that the COO knows will just crush the existing teams, the COO doesn't have to say, I don't like your idea. They say, your impact score is too low relative to your effort estimation, according to the PNIAC criteria. The rejection becomes objective, not personal.
That reframing is a key insight into organizational politics. But PNIAC only governs the start gate. What about the middle stages?
That's where the stage gate templates come in. This is a very lightweight templated process. Concept to MVP to pilot to scale, and they were really careful in the design to mitigate that risk of process bureaucracy.
How do you keep them lightweight? I mean, in so many companies, stage gates just become these career-limiting bureaucratic hurdles.
By focusing on evidence, not on documentation volume. Each gate is just a short, evidence-based checklist. At the MVP gate, the checklist might only ask 2 questions. Has this delivered a core value prop to 10 internal users? Is the cost estimate within 10% of the initial budget? Simple yes or no.
And the pilot gate is even stricter.
Much stricter. It requires predefined specific kill criteria. For instance, the kill criteria for a pilot might be, if this feature fails to increase user retention by 5% in 60 days, it is terminated. This rigor forces high-quality, high-velocity execution, or a rapid exit. It prevents the team from throwing good money after bad.
So the stage gates limit sunk costs and force an early exit based on objective data. Now let's talk about the people who navigate these gates, the execution champions, introduced in Q2.
This is the critical shift in accountability. Every single approved initiative must have a named execution champion. And this role brings 3 things: explicit, single-point accountability, Clearly defined delivery KPIs that are tied to their own performance objectives, and crucially, delegated decision authority.
Okay, giving an individual delegated authority sounds high risk in a company that is struggling with discipline. How could that backfire?
It backfires if PNAC doesn't clearly define the guardrails. The champion has the authority to make day-to-day tactical decisions to keep the project moving fast. Shifting resources within the approved budget, making technical trade-offs, but they do not have the authority to change the scope, budget, or timeline beyond a predefined variance, say 10%, without going back to PNAC.
So the system only works if the champion understands the rules.
Right, but the immense benefit is speed. You eliminate that agonizing lag where you're waiting for the CEO to sign off on some minor technical issue.
But I have to bring up a political point here. If the culture still rewards starting over finishing, how does appointing a champion not just turn that person into a political target when their project needs to be killed because it failed the pilot criteria?
That's a really valid concern, and it's exactly why the cultural shift we'll talk about is inseparable from the process. The process the PNIAC has to explicitly protect the champion. If the champion executes the pilot phase perfectly, gathers the data, and then recommends termination because the kill criteria were not met, PNIAC has to publicly recognize that champion for disciplined execution and timely failure.
So the failure is owned by the idea, not the person.
Precisely. If the leadership punishes the messenger who brought the bad news, the whole system just collapses overnight.
That's a powerful requirement for leadership. All of these mechanics, PNIAC, stage gates, champions, they all have to be tracked and made visible, which leads us to the strategic health dashboard.
Transparency is the ultimate antidote to chaos and mistrust. This monthly dashboard is designed to be a living feedback loop for the entire organization, visible to the board and all employees. It tracks the health of the execution engine.
Let's look at the top line metrics. Start with the most important one, project abandonment rate.
This is the key pathology metric. And how do you calculate it? They have to quantify, over a rolling 3-month period, the percentage of projects that got significant resources, say more than 50 engineering hours, that were then killed or put on indefinite hold before reaching the scale gate. If that number is high, the ADHD hasn't been cured.
Next up is OKR completion percent.
The key effectiveness metric. If the company is actually focusing, the completion rate of their prioritized OKRs has to rise. If they're consistently hitting 70% or more, it means that Q1 Workshop and PNIAC are holding the line.
And this third one is critical for monitoring the process itself, average decision time.
Yes. Calculated from the moment a structured proposal, that 4 criteria form, is submitted to PNIAC until the final decision is made. If this time starts to creep up, say beyond a 2-week average, it's a huge red flag. It signals process stagnation. The governance is becoming too slow, which will just justify people bypassing the system, a major failure mode.
And the final execution metric, active project count.
The key focus metric. This should be a clearly defined, manageable number relative to the size of the team. If that number starts to balloon, it's an immediate signal that resource dilution is happening all over again, regardless of what PNIAC says it's doing.
And they set some aggressive 12-month benchmarks. A 50% reduction in project abandonment is huge. But let's look at the financial target. An ROI on prioritized projects of greater than 1.5x.
And that financial target demonstrates a commitment to capital efficiency. It forces PNI and the execution champions to be really disciplined about that projected impact. They're not just aiming to finish projects, they're aiming to finish projects that actually generate significantly more value than they cost.
They're prioritizing value realization, not just busyness.
That's the difference between an idea-driven company and an execution-driven company.
This whole shift is structurally sound, but we have to move into the biggest challenge of all, the human element. Processes are easy to write, but culture is nearly impossible to change.
And the cultural adoption is what determines if this entire 12-month exercise becomes a temporary program or a permanent shift. The plan really emphasizes that leadership has to control the change management narrative from day one.
So what should that core message be? It can't be about pointing fingers.
No, the narrative has to be aspirational but honest. It's, we are brilliant at starting. We will become brilliant at finishing. It validates the energy and creativity that got them this far, while focusing the organization on the maturity it needs to scale.
And the plan mandates a very visible, candid kickoff.
Yes, a leadership workshop followed by a company-wide town hall where they use the diagnosis data, that high abandonment rate, to justify the overhaul. Transparency is what fuels trust here.
And critically, that Q1 focus on early wins. It isn't just about shipping a product, is it? It's about shifting the cultural reward system immediately.
Oh, absolutely. The public celebration of completion for those Q1 focus sprints, it has to be louder and more prominent than any celebration of a new idea. This is about changing what success looks like internally.
Right.
If the CEO singles out the team that did the grinding work to close out an old feature and praises them for capital efficiency and discipline, that cultural signal is stronger than any PNIAC process diagram you could ever draw.
So, how do they formalize that shift starting in Q2? How do they make sure incentives genuinely reward execution over just ideation?
They have to systematically align the performance management system. The most practical step is to revise performance objectives and actually tie incentives to completion. This means including a finish rate and specific delivery KPIs in annual reviews.
A finish rate. How would you even calculate that for different roles? An engineer's finish rate seems different from a sales lead's.
It is. For an engineer or product manager on a core project, the finish rate is directly tied to the project's successful journey through the stage gates to scale, weighted by their contribution. For a sales lead, their finish rate might be based on the successful adoption or revenue generated by a new feature that was just scaled.
So an output metric?
Exactly. The key is that a small portion, maybe 10 to 15% of variable pay or recognition, is tied directly to these completion and impact metrics, not just hours worked or tasks started. And I have to constantly spotlight finishers in company communications, making them the new heroes.
Now we have to get to the risks. No strategy this ambitious comes without resistance, and the plan wisely identifies the biggest threat of all, founder resistance to discipline.
This is the ultimate execution killer, because the founders often embody that original idea-driven culture. They feel that process stifles creativity.
So how do you mitigate that?
The mitigation strategy has to be constantly reinforced. They're implementing discipline pivoting, not preventing it. They must constantly remind the founders that their ability to innovate is preserved through that small, controlled exploration stream budget. But the best tool here is data.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly. Use the data from the Q1 focus sprints to show the quick, tangible ROI of disciplined execution. Show them that a 50% completion rate on a few projects generates far more money than a 5% completion rate across 10 projects. Proof beats ideological resistance.
What about the risks in the new system itself? We touched on the risk of process bureaucracy earlier.
That risk is mitigated by the dashboard. They have to obsessively track that average decision time. If they see that time to decision metric creeping up, it is a non-negotiable requirement for the SRT to step in and immediately streamline the PNAC template or simplify the checklists. The process has to serve speed. Speed can't serve the process.
And the risk that founders complain they can no longer innovate freely, that the exploration stream is too small. The risk of underfunded exploration.
The plan deliberately accepts this risk, but it manages it. By keeping the exploration budget small, they prevent the organization from overcommitting to high-risk ventures. And the key mitigation is those strict exit criteria. The exploration stream has to be a true funnel. High volume in, quick kills, and only the absolute highest potential ideas exit to the main exploitation stream. It's about controlled experimentation. It protects the company from being bankrupted by novelty.
This brings us back to what might be the most critical structural risk, which we have to really analyze here. The composition of PNIAC and the potential for the CEO, the historic source of all the new ideas, to become the bottleneck.
This is the acid test of the entire plan. If the CEO, who suffered from the starting syndrome, is required to sit on PNAC and approve every pivot, they risk becoming a choke point. They might endlessly deliberate, ask for more information and effectively stall the whole process.
Driving up that average decision time metric.
Or, even worse, they might just approve their own spontaneous ideas without going through the necessary rigor.
So how does the structure of PNAC actually mitigate the CEO's own potential weakness?
It relies heavily on the COO and the strict mandate of that 4 criteria form. The process is the guardrail. The COO or operations lead must have the courage and the structural authority, backed by the board rep, to say, CEO, your proposal is lacking quantification on effort and risk. It cannot proceed until this form is complete.
So the CEO's role is strategic alignment, but they can't act impulsively.
Their ability to do so is constrained by the due diligence process owned by the rest of the committee. If the CEO consistently bypasses PNAC, the culture immediately reverts to the old norms and the entire plan fails.
That puts immense pressure on the COO and the board rep to maintain that discipline, but it does ensure accountability is distributed.
It creates a system of checks and balances where organizational health is prioritized over individual preference. It makes the system robust.
And it all comes down to the final action items, the 3 non-negotiable asks needed to launch this plan on January 1st, 2026.
Right. 1. Approve the formation of the Strategic Repositioning Team, the SRT, immediately in December. They are the owners of this change. 2. Schedule and commit to that one-day strategic reset workshop for the first week of January. That's where the crucial decision on the 3 annual priorities gets made. And 3. Provide all the comprehensive baseline documents, the current project list, decision history, OKRs to the SRT, so they can quantify that baseline abandonment rate.
Without those 3 approvals, the plan just remains a document.
Not an actionable cure.
So we've navigated the full strategic arc here. We've moved from the diagnosis of organizational ADHD, the scattered resources, the constant pivoting, the cultural rewards for starting, all the way to the practical cure of disciplined agility.
Which is enforced by these powerful tactical mechanisms, that tension-filled P&I gatekeepers, the lightweight evidence-based stage gates, and the crucial separation of work into exploration and exploitation streams.
The target is aggressive, a 50% reduction in project abandonment within 12 months.
It is. But what's so vital for you, the learner, is understanding the universal applicability of these tools. This isn't just a fix for a high-growth startup. If you or your team are constantly struggling to convert brilliant ideas into finished products, the answer lies in institutionalizing discipline right at the start gate.
That 4 criteria intake form.
That form alignment, impact, effort, risk is your personal PNI. You need to ask those questions before you commit your most precious resource, your focus.
Absolutely. The structural discipline creates the psychological safety to actually commit fully. But let's return to that human element for our final provocative thought. We analyzed how the CEO, the idea generator, is also the required gatekeeper in PNI.
Yes, and the most challenging metric to track in this entire overhaul, it isn't project completion or the ROI. It's cultural lag.
Meaning?
If the leadership successfully implements the process, they get the dashboards running, but they fail to consistently model new behavior. If the CEO bypasses PNX, even wants to launch a passion project, the organization receives the strongest possible signal that the old norms still apply.
And if that happens, the process just becomes theater, and the organization reverts to rewarding starting the moment external market pressures increase.
It does.
This raises the single most important question for any leader considering this kind of overhaul. Is your structure designed to absorb the inevitable weakness of its strongest members? And more practically for you today, if you had to identify the point in your own team's execution process where you most often lose momentum, where is that bottleneck located? Is it the start gate, the middle stage, or is it the leadership at the very top?
Identifying that bottleneck is the first real step toward achieving disciplined agility.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into strategic execution.